This slide is why I don't care for us using the labels of strategic action and tactical action, because I don't think in some cases we talk about a strategy of competitive actions. And by that I mean we don't put them into a larger context. So you see this little chart of my construction, and I'm going to talk about the four quadrants. The first quadrant is what I call the dominate quadrant. This is when a relatively weaker rival to you, and you just launch occasional attacks to deal with them. And the way I describe that is you're trying to take their oxygen supply and you're trying to squeeze it, but not close it off completely. And so you're allowing the rival to stay alive, even though you probably could take them out if you wanted to. I think you can make the case that probably right now Nokia is a dominated competitor in the smartphone business. Maybe Research in Motion BlackBerry is in the same point. We'll see how their new phones take off and sell. Microsoft had a competitor that it had in this situation. This competitor, about 15 years ago, was on the verge of bankruptcy, and Microsoft decided to put in a several $100 million investment into that company to help it avert bankruptcy. I got a feeling you probably couldn't guess the name of that competitor, but it was Apple. Had Microsoft not invested in 1997, Apple probably would have gone bankrupt. I bet Microsoft would like to reconsider that. Well, why would a company choose to dominate a competitor instead of just take it out completely? There are a couple of reasons. The first is it creates this false sense of competition. To everybody else, it looks like there's a competitive marketplace because there are multiple people in there fighting for your business, and the reality is not so much. There is the dominant competitor that allows these other people to stay in the space, so it looks like competition, so you don't get antitrust actions against you. You don't get targeted by activist groups for being a bully and those sorts of things. But it really isn't competition. You kind of feel like you own them, and they only eat, so to speak, what you let them eat. And the second thing is this false competition can also keep rivals from moving into the space. So it may be that you don't want a particular competitor in an associated industry to come into that space, and it looks crowded, where if they were to figure or look at it, they may say, well, these people are really weak and we can take them out, but that raises the cost of entry, and so they decide not to do that. The next quadrant, though, is when a relatively strong company takes on a weaker company, and it does so to take it out. And this is what I call the defeat strategy. You're looking for a swift war. And an example of this is what Bed Bath & Beyond did to Linens and Things about 5 or 6 years ago. Linens and Things had been taken private, had accumulated a lot of debt, and Bed Bath & Beyond as a company knew that they were having a hard time servicing their debt, and they didn't have any spare cash. Well, as a turnaround strategy, Linens and Things had targeted about 60 markets as their most profitable markets, and that's what they were going to do to turn around their business, increase their profits and their cash flow so that they were going to be able to service the debt and survive. Well, what did Bed Bath & Beyond do? They launched massive discounting in those 60 markets, not system-wide, and they just took it to Linens and Things and basically said, this is a war of attrition, and I know that I have a lot more blood in me than you have in you, and you're going to bleed to death. And they did. And so what happens after that rival is removed? Well, then magically all the discounts stop, market share increases for the survivor, and the profits get much better. In the midst of the 2008 economic downturn, Bed Bath & Beyond was having one of its best years ever, right after Linens and Things had gone under. Obviously, the reason firms don't do this is you got to get it right. If you think you can take them out easy and you go full-scale war against them, expecting to defeat them quickly, and it turns out they're more resilient, it can be a pretty costly situation. Quadrant 3 is what I call the skirmish quadrant, and I really think this is what defines a lot of competition. These are relatively matched rivals that do tactical actions relatively frequently or in spurts and waves, and nothing really changes. And an example of this is the insurance companies that I talked about before. You got Flow and Progressive, the Mayhem guy for Allstate, the African American guy with the great voice going State Farm for State Farm. You've got the Gecko for Geico and some of the other commercials. You've got the terrible singers on Nationwide. And now my insurer, USAA, is into the fight, buying their We Know What It Means to Serve commercials. So everybody is spending money, and probably very little is changing. A lot of companies would say, well, we're just defending our turf. And they'll all go, well, he did it, he did it, he did it, he did it, he started it. And likely nothing is going to change. And I think this typifies a lot of competitive actions. Everybody's defending their turf. Everybody thinks the other person started it, and not too much is going to happen. And then you get the really interesting block that I call war. And this is when two big or more titans really go at it. The cliche I like to use is, if you ever watch hockey games, when the hockey players are getting serious about a fight, what do? Phew, hockey gloves on the ice, they go bare knuckles. So the war quadrant is bare knuckles. To a certain extent, I think you may be seeing this today between Apple and Samsung. Apple suing Samsung and going after such a huge judgment, that's arguably war, trying to really seriously weaken Samsung financially, but also in the mind of the consumer. And Samsung, you see, is countering them toe for toe. I think another great war that is happening, sometimes below the surface, sometimes above the surface, is between Walmart and Amazon. We know that Walmart is the world's leading bricks and mortar retailer. Amazon is the world's leading online retailer. And Walmart has made it very clear that they're not happy with that arrangement. They want to be the world's leading retailer, period. So what are some of the things they're doing? They are launching out with some huge discounts in some of Amazon's most profitable segments. A couple of Christmases ago, Amazon was very aggressive about discounting their books, trying to make it so that people wouldn't buy books online, or at least not the bestsellers, because they were so much cheaper and more convenient. At Walmart, you see Walmart ramping up, trying to better integrate its bricks and mortar and online operation. But Amazon isn't standing still in this either. Amazon has bought some publishing companies that have very popular titles, and guess what they're not doing? That publishing company is not selling those books to Walmart. So they're trying to create exclusive content that you can't get at Walmart. So these are people that are just fighting it out. This is a long-term battle. Sometimes it's not so obvious, sometimes it is. And what they're really trying to do is reorient the industry so that when all is said and done, they are in the best position. So I want to wrap this up, and this is a long wrap up, don't think I'm about done, with this slide about winning strategies when it comes to competitive dynamics. And what do we know? The first thing is you have to define what it means to win. And the subtext of this is market share always good? And the answer to that is no. During the BSG game, anytime any company wants, they can probably go out and substantially jump their market share, and in the process lose a lot of money. So what good is that? Did you know that Apple, which is, stock prices coming back down now, but off that incredible run, never was, and not recently, the leading seller of smartphones. They were just the most profitable. So they never chased the market share so much as they chased the profitability. And you're going to have to define what it means to win. And in your industry, is a gain of market share, even if it costs you profitability in the short term, going to lead to more profitability in the long term. Second thing is, almost always, it pays to be subtle and deceptive. Now, an important caveat to that, publicly traded companies cannot make deceptive statements in public, because that would be misleading potential investors or misleading current investors, and that's false material information. So that's illegal. But in terms of leading people astray, particularly your competitors, that's almost always the way to go. And that's why you have to really read through what companies are saying in their press releases, because they are probably trying to hide some of their competitive intentions. And as far as being subtle, that's always a good idea. And the reason is, whenever you take these competitive attacks, the best thing that can happen to you is that your competitor will never even be aware of what happened, because then you basically get to run freely. There's nothing to stop this advantage that you've gained. And so the more subtle you can be, A, the more likely they are to not be aware of what you've done, and B, even if they're aware of what you've done in the sense that they know you took action, they don't understand how detrimental it is to them. In either case, that works to your benefit. So being subtle, and yes, when it comes to your competitors, not your public pronouncements, deceiving them and making them think you're going to do certain things when you're not, that tends to be beneficial as far as your competitive strategy goes. Hit when they're tied down. This gets to do with the capability. Sometimes you have a capable adversary or a capable rival, and what you have to do is hit them when they're down. So when Boeing launched the 787, Airbus was tied down with some severe problems with their A380 jumbo jet and a military program called the A400, such that Airbus didn't have the engineering capacity to go off and begin to launch a new airplane to match the 787. Advantage Boeing. Boeing got tremendous sales because Airbus was not able to counter that new airplane. Of course, we now know that Boeing basically squandered that advantage with its production delays and now some of the issues with the manufacturing that are playing out even as I make this recording. But they hit them when they were down. Or you can hit them in a way that they can't respond. This would be launching off and doing a market attack where you're going to hurt your competitor, but they don't have the capability to do something similar. Or they just don't have the capability to hurt you back nearly as directly. That's a really hard situation to find, but try to hit when they don't have the ability to counter. If you are going to be a second mover in particular, you must move fast. Even if you're a first mover, usually when it becomes obvious what you're doing, you want to move quickly and make it implemented quickly. But particularly if you are either responding to an attack or consciously a second mover, keep that gap as small as possible between when they take action and when you respond, because the wider the gap, the more advantage that they gain. The next is play hardball. And this may make some of you squeamish. And this is to say, if you're going to launch an attack, particularly if you're not kind of in the skirmish quadrant, if you're trying to defeat or declare war, you're going to have to get after it. You're going to have to do what it takes. And that's pretty hard. Walmart, for example, has a reputation as a hardball competitor. It has no problem putting people out of business. Some of us may be uncomfortable with that, but if you're going to, in the game of competitive dynamics, usually the hardball player, if done well, wins. Next is the impact with the business strategy. And this goes back to define winning. This was my dissertation was about competitive dynamics and competitive aggressiveness. And I found a very interesting result. Firms that were tending to use a more differentiated strategy, when they became more aggressive, their market share actually went down. And firms that were pursuing a low-cost strategy, when they got more aggressive, their market share typically went up. It's interesting what getting aggressive did in market share in the two different types of firms. In terms of profitability, no difference. No difference. So you can see that you have to understand when you get aggressive, what are you going after? What's likely to happen? Let me cloud this a little bit when we talk about forbearance and co-opetition. Forbearance says, I see your attack. It might even hurt a little bit, but I'm not going to respond to it. And firms cannot tacitly collude, but you'll see them, I don't want to say try, but sometimes you'll see in the Wall Street Journal, they'll dismiss, oh, so-and-so cut their prices, but we think that's going to hurt them in the short term, and in the long run, it's not going to make any difference to us, and we're not going to match that price cut. And so what they're really trying to do is to signal, one of the things they may be trying to do is to signal to the competitor, I'm not going to match your price cut unless I really think it's starting to hurt, and I'd like you to reconsider and take that price cut out and bring your prices back up. So there's this thing of, do I respond? And often in their non-response, they'll try to get the other person to stop doing what they're doing. Kind of in between forbearance and co-opetition is the idea of rivals recognizing that they're in the same industry. And so, in essence, this whole discussion of competitive dynamics, we've been in that middle circle of the Porter's five forces analysis, the rivals block. Porter wants us to see good competition versus bad competition. Bad competition tends to be price competition, ramping up of services and the like, such that what happens to the industry profit pool, it gets smaller. And this is often what happens. Porter says you want good competition, and here's how you get good competition. You make your share of the pie get bigger. How does that happen? Think about it in the five forces model. Particularly, it could be that the substitute products that are getting some of the money that you'd like to have in your industry, by the competition, you really raise the quality of your offering, and these people that were buying the substitute products now buy your products, so we get the pie bigger. It could be that we figure out ways to change our products such that our suppliers mutually become less powerful, and we're able to take some money that we were spending on suppliers and instead put it into our profit pool. Same may be true of the buyers. It could be that you go into very different positions, and in reality, the power of the buyer diminishes because there's a lot more differentiation between the products. It could be the threat of new entrants, that you're able to do things as an industry through your competitive moves that make it so much harder for people to enter that you feel safe in expanding your profit margins, feeling that nobody can enter. So this is the idea of good competition for an industry. I'm not sure how much good competition you see in a lot of industries. I'm really confident that you see a lot of bad competition. And the last thing is co-opetition. And this is where you see people that are simultaneously competing and cooperating. And how does this work in the long run? A great example is I talked about, I think you can argue that maybe Samsung and Apple are in a war in the smartphone industry. Guess where Apple buys a lot of its hardware for its products? Samsung. So at the very same time they're suing each other in court, Apple's buying products from Samsung. Although you got to figure long term they're not going to want to do that. How about Samsung versus Google? Samsung is using the Android software platform, but with Google's purchase of Motorola, Google's going to enter the handset business big time here pretty soon. And so even though they're cooperating on the software side, they're competing on the hardware side. And how that's going to turn out isn't quite clear. So to wrap up this discussion, the thing I want you to do is to think about how you can compete smartly, but understand, like it or not, that you are competing. Brief comment about the midterm exam. like I said in class, and will reiterate again, I will be available in the classroom at 5 p.m. And that's really designed to give those people that have a class immediately after my class the opportunity to come in and start a half hour early on the exam. Likewise, I will stay in the classroom until 7:30, letting people take the exam, so that if someone wants to show up at 5:30, they'll get 2 hours. Sometimes people tell me that they're time crunched writing out their answers. I'm not looking to put a time crunch on you, and that's why I'll expand out the window. But again, I'm really intending to hold it to 2 hours, because you don't need to write any longer than that. Good luck on the exam, and I look forward to diving into the simulation as our next step.